Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we are talking about why, even amid uncertainty, your focus on customer experience is a necessity, not a nice to have. I'm excited to welcome today's podcast guest, Jeannie Walters, who is an award-winning customer experience expert, author of the book Experience is Everything, international keynote speaker, and founder of Experience Investigators, a firm that helps companies increase sales and customer retention through elevated customer experiences. Jeannie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so pleased to be here. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
it's a pleasure. So, to get started, can you just tell our listeners a little bit more, anything you would like to share about yourself, your background, or experience investigators?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeannie Walters, and I founded this company, Experience Investigators, in 2009. And the mission of our company from the beginning has been to create fewer ruined days for customers. And the way we do that is by working with leaders who want to make customer experience their competitive advantage. So we do that through, I do keynote speaking and training, workshops, the upcoming book, Experiences Everything, and then also just a lot of coaching and advisory work as well.
Wonderful. So, you shared an article recently talking about why, like I said it in the title, despite uncertainty, now is no time to neglect customer experience.
Mhm.
You mentioned that although 78% of leaders plan to increase CX investment in 2025, 13% anticipate cuts in personnel budgets. So this is showing tension between
Mhm.
intent and resource allocation. Let's start with, can you sort of reiterate for our listeners what were the main things you wanted folks to take away from that article?
I think a lot of times when we talk about customer experience, a few things happen. One is people assume like, oh, if we talk about it, that's doing it, right? As long as we tell people to be nice to the customer, they should figure that out. And I like to really think about it as it's a strategic advantage when you have a strategy. And
Hmm.
that means that you have to be intentional, you have to be proactive. And what I was trying to say with that article is you can talk about it all you want. You can have all this wonderful intention, but if you don't actually put effort into it, put daily activities that drive towards certain goals for your organization, and if you don't know where you're going with your customer experience, then you are taking huge risks. We are taking huge risks because we are going to lose customers. We are going to have customers who don't ever tell us in a survey that they're unhappy. They're just going to
Hmm.
go, they're just going to leave. Your employee experience drops, your referral rate drops, you have a higher cost of service. There are all these things that happen if you are not intentional. And I think what you just highlighted with that juxtaposition of the numbers is it's very human nature. We want to do this, but
Hmm.
we don't always know how. And we don't always think that it actually requires resources, and it
Hmm.
does.
Yeah. I was sharing with Jeannie before we started recording this episode that in field service specifically, what we've seen over the past, many years really is just what you're saying, Jeannie, an increase in talking about how important customer experience is,
Mhm.
putting more emphasis on how frontline employees treat customers while they're on site. And those things are great. But what I shared with you is that what we haven't completely seen, and we're getting there, is organizations reflecting that focus in how they're measuring the performance of those workers. So
Mhm.
you think about how you put someone in a really tough spot if you're telling them it is really important for you to focus more on the customer experience, but their incentive is tied to how many jobs they get done per day.
Mhm.
You're incentivizing them to rush people, to, be abrupt with people,
Mhm.
to just play a numbers game, not to focus on how that customer actually feels. And of course, all of these things need to be balanced appropriately. But what we have to be very careful of is, this idea of just because we say it's important doesn't mean that we have aligned our organization to operate in that manner.
That's
Can
right.
you kind of come back to this point about why, this air of uncertainty kind of exacerbates or could
Mhm.
exacerbate that divide?
Well, I think customer experience is often not defined in any way within an organization. And, you brought up we're asking people sometimes to have totally conflicting priorities. We're saying, yes, you need to really deliver for your customers. We're going to do a follow-up survey. We're going to ask them how they felt. And we need you to make sure that you're only there for 15 minutes, right? This is
Hmm.
happening in healthcare. This is happening all over. I did some work with an HVAC company and I did ride-alongs with the repair people
Hmm.
and the conflicts that they have. They were told so many mixed messages about don't fill out the paperwork in somebody's driveway, but don't park on the street, right? Like literally things like that.
Hmm.
And so when we look at that and we give all this different stuff, and yet at the end of the day, we're thinking, well, we invested in the training. Like, look at this big number where we invested in the training. Are we really getting the return on that? We should just cross that out for next year.
Hmm.
And that's what happens in uncertainty because leaders start coming from a place of fear and anxiety. And it becomes more about how can we get leaner? How can we make sure we're being as efficient as possible? And if you don't understand the risk and the impact of truly investing in customer experience, just like any other part of the business,
Hmm.
you would never say to your sales team, oh, we had a bad fourth quarter. I guess sales doesn't work,
Hmm.
right? Like we would never say that. So I guess we'll get rid of the sales team.
Hmm.
But we do that when we talk about customer experience because we as business people have not been taught this.
Hmm.
It wasn't even part of the equation for decades or centuries in some legacy organizations because they didn't have to. They just had the captive customer and that worked. It doesn't work anymore. We need to make sure that we are investing in the customer experience and listening to both the customers and the employees about what that needs to be.
Hmm.
But you and I might come from different worlds. We might have different life experiences. We might want different experiences. So we might assume that talking to a customer longer is the right thing to do because that's what we would want as a customer. Well, not all customers want that. Some
Hmm.
customers want efficiency. So we have to make sure that as an organization, we agree on who are we every time we show up for our customers. We have to agree on that first because otherwise we're asking every single individual in our organization to make a judgment call every interaction that they have with a customer.
Hmm.
So that is the part that I am seeing right now in this age of uncertainty. We're forgetting the risk of not investing in this, of
Hmm.
not treating this like any other part of the business.
Yeah. So if you were to give advice to a service leader or an operational leader within an organization, how to advocate in their business about the importance of continuing to not only talk about, but invest
Mhm.
in customer experience, what advice would you give them?
Start with your organizational goals. We need to stop talking about this is good for the customer because our
Hmm.
leaders here, oh, that sounds like it's not good for us. Start with your organizational goals and then break that down into what what could we impact. So for instance, a lot of organizations are like we need to focus on revenue growth, right? That's they have some sort of revenue growth goal, they have some sort of expense cutting goal.
Hmm.
Every organization in the whole world, that's what they care about when you get right down to it. So what could you do to impact those things? Well, if you have fewer repair trucks going out, that is lowering the cost of service. That is keeping expenses down. That is keeping customers happier. So, fixing something the first time could be one of those metrics that is real and tangible, makes a big difference to the customer, and makes a big difference to your organizational goal.
Hmm.
We use something, and the book actually breaks this down. So, whenever we work with organizations, the first thing I do is talk about that we have to get this right from the beginning with the mindset, then the strategy, then the discipline behind it. So the mindset, everybody likes to say we're customer centric, but we don't give people what does that really mean and how are we different than everybody else?
Hmm.
And so you really have to define what we call a customer experience mission statement. And then defining the strategy around your organizational goals first. And then also, what do your leaders care about? Your
Hmm.
chief financial officer thinks very differently than your chief marketing officer, probably. So, what could you say to each one of them that helps them realize this is good for the business?
Hmm.
So, cutting expenses, getting that revenue, what does it cost to actually acquire a customer? If you can lower that number, then by keeping more customers, by improving retention, referrals, all of those things, then that's speaking the language of a lot of your leaders.
Hmm.
And then you need to figure out what are the levers to pull in your space. So if you're a service leader, what can you do? Because you can't necessarily fix a broken product, right?
Hmm.
But you can certainly start figuring out what is going well here. Who are the people who are making sure that we don't have those repair trucks going out? What can we
Hmm.
learn from them? What can we standardize? What can we bring to other parts of the journey? And then you make a plan around that. Because if we just say things like we need to invest in service or we need to do better with customer experience, it's not meaningful. We have to
Hmm.
make this meaningful to our leaders.
Yeah. And I think in uncertain times, where to your point, the focus is often on reducing costs,
Mhm.
kind of minimizing, articulating it through the lens always of what we need to do, what the customer is experiencing. It just straight out of the gate sounds like cost, cost, cost,
Yep.
right? And we've talked a lot on this podcast about the skill of storytelling,
Hmm.
and it's really well aligned to what you're bringing up here, which is the the focus, the end goal is the same, but you're talking about it through the context of what matters to the audience you're speaking to.
Right.
And sometimes those, once you see it laid out, look like a pretty small distinction, but it
Mhm.
has a tremendous impact on how that message is received.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we have you mentioned that often you see this being something that companies of course acknowledge as important and say
Mhm.
that they need to or are focusing on. What is the distinction in the businesses you engage with of like where do companies kind of cross over to really taking action? Like what is
Mhm.
the light bulb moment or what is the lever that distinguishes those who just talk about the
Mhm.
importance of this versus those who are, putting the action behind it?
I think I wish I could say there was like a light bulb or a light switch moment, but I think
Mm-hmm.
it's more like it's an evolution. It's something that takes some time. It takes a lot of repetition, it takes a lot of storytelling, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see is there are people who usually it starts with a change agent. I always say like there's
Mm-hmm.
one customer experience change agent who is realizing like this is important. We need to do more. So they start building coalitions and they start saying, we need to talk about this more. We need to be more consistent. They start getting it. And it really isn't until we take that small group of mighty warriors, right? And we turn it into something real. And sometimes that first step is simply aligning around, yes, we're going to do this. And this is who we are no matter what. This is what we're deciding. We can't be all things to all people. So we
Mm-hmm.
cannot say that we are the fastest and the most accurate. We can't. Those two things will conflict at some point. So we have to decide who are we and
Mm-hmm.
how do we define that and get that out. And I think that's when we start seeing the change. But really, this is a maturity model. This is like a journey that your organization goes on as well. And so I love seeing when we have defined that mission because that's when you start getting people on board with, oh, even though I don't have service in my title,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still part of this, right? Supply chain is a part of the customer experience. Invoicing, uh, logistics, any single group is part of the customer experience.
Mm-hmm.
We do some work with cities, and that's fascinating too, because you get people who think, well, we don't have customers. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, no, you absolutely do. So once you start getting everybody on board, that's when the change starts. But then you really have to move that into the real world and into these are the goals. This is what we're doing. It's not all about feedback metrics, right? A lot of organizations track net promoter score, customer satisfaction. They have surveys. Those are measurements, not outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to make sure that we are using the measurements and the insights we're getting from those things, along with what are we watching customers do? What are their behaviors telling us? What do the analytics tell us? All of these things. And in a lot of organizations, like might be listening today, you have people out in the field, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
people who are dealing every day with customers.
Mm-hmm.
We better be including them in this conversation
Right.
because otherwise we're going to mess up and we don't
Mm-hmm.
really understand what it's like. I was working with a medical supply company and their marketing team got very excited about some samples that they were sending. And they went into all these doctors' offices and they got very excited because they put together this beautiful big package. Well, the sales team was like, oh, have you seen the closets of these doctors? They have
Mm-hmm.
no room for this. So they would tear up these beautiful packages and just bring in the product.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's the kind of conversation we have to have too, because yes, it's not just about what we think is good for the customer. It's about understanding their real lives, their daily lives to
Yeah.
actually deliver for them.
Yeah. And the frontline field workers are a treasure trove of that
Yes.
insight, often through what they just witness, what they observe, but
Yep.
also the conversations they have, the comments that get made, the trends that they see from customer to customer. And
And
it's such an untapped resource in so
I
many
totally agree.
organizations. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And they're
Which,
trusted too. Sorry, they're
right.
the customers really trust because they see them again and again. In
Hmm.
many cases, not all the time, but there's a story I tell in one of my keynotes about a grill that I ordered for my husband for Father's Day and just the series of things that went wrong. And we had to get it repaired. And the repair guy came out and basically said, well, there was no incentive for him to tell the company what he knew was the problem when it was being installed. Because he said,
Hmm.
oh, those installation guys, they get it wrong all the time because he gets paid for the repair.
Hmm.
And so it's like it was just this series of things where we're not talking to each other. We're not creating goals that are actually realistic. We're having all these conflicting priorities. We need to start at the top. We need to start with who we are and
Hmm.
then figure out what is it we can really influence and what are we asking all of our people to do and keep
Hmm.
them in the conversation.
Yeah. And where are we creating those points of friction or stress because we're giving those conflicting
That's right.
directions, or we're asking them for one thing and incentivizing them on something else? Yeah.
Yep.
So, talking about the value of the frontline employee brings us to an important point, which is the crucial tie between the employee experience and the customer experience. Can we talk a little bit about, how do you view that relationship? What do you see the companies that are getting it, that are, making good progress on that evolution? What are they doing well in terms of
Mhm.
looking at, understanding, and sort of working with that correlation?
I am a big believer that if we are not reflecting the experience that we want for our customers in our organizations, then you have this, you know, problem with integrity. You
Hmm.
really do. And people and employees feel that. They
Hmm.
totally recognize that. And so I think you absolutely have to make sure that if you are making a promise to your customers about the experience they have, you're making that same promise to your employees. And they're completely related.
Hmm.
Employees are the number one driver of the customer experience, bar none. So we better make sure that they feel good about what they're doing. They, and This is bringing a story to mind where it was an organization, it was a technology firm, and they were having a really hard time with some service issues. They were getting a lot of calls, and their team were really trying. They were doing all the right things, but the way that we got the leaders to listen was asking a very simple question of, would you refer somebody, a friend, to work here?
Mm-hmm.
And by tying that to the customer experience, they were like, no way. Nobody wants to work at a place where everybody's complaining all the time, where you're dealing with these customer fires all the time and
Mm-hmm.
nothing is changing. And that's what we use to get the attention for the customer experience. So I think that we are constantly overlooking what it means to align your values as an individual. Like when you're an individual employee, if you are feeling like, you know what, this is a bunch of,
Mm-hmm.
BS that they're just telling customers, but they treat us this way,
Yeah.
you will not be able to hang on to employees. You will have employees who snap and break.
Mm-hmm.
And you also just are creating a workspace where basically your promises don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, and when we work on that customer experience mission statement, that is an internal document.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we also want people to understand when I am looking for information from a colleague or from another team, that is part of the customer experience too.
Mm-hmm.
So if we made a commitment to get back to our customers within 24 hours, that's our internal commitment as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This to me is where you get into, do you really mean it?
Yeah.
Right? Because, you know, there really shouldn't be a business today. You can ask, do you think customer experience matters? And they say no, right?
Right.
Everyone's going to say yes. Everyone
We
is
hope.
going to have it somewhere in their, about
Hmm.
us, how much we care and
Hmm.
what we're committed to doing. It's going to be on the walls somewhere in the offices,
Yep.
etc. But to me, how much leadership is bought into really doing it, which
Hmm.
really I think comes back to, you mentioned mindset, strategy, and then what was
Discipline.
discipline.
Hmm.
You know, the mindset is really comes from believing that this actually matters, right?
Hmm.
Believing that it not only that it matters, but that it is ultimately going to be the difference between success and failure, right? Believing that that rests with the customer experience and then working through all of those layers. And I think that that realization that we can't say this matters and we can't ask our employees to uphold promises to customers while we are treating them as though they don't matter
Hmm.
is really where a lot of companies start to struggle.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
if they start reflecting on, well, what does that mean? And, you know, all of the things that touches and all of the layers of change that might
Hmm.
entail, it gets, quite
Yep.
complex.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. What is it that you see companies who have a really strong employee experience doing well?
Hmm. Well, the number one thing is they're actually listening to their employees in an authentic way. And I
Hmm.
say authentic way because just like we did to customers, surveys became the thing, right?
Hmm.
And there was an organization I was working with that they would do the employee survey once a year. And then the way that it was handled afterwards was if a manager got below a certain score, they were required to have a series of meetings. Well, these meetings were painful. Nobody liked them.
Hmm.
This was a bad manager who wasn't a good listener. So, of course, these meetings were kind of a bust. So, surprise, surprise, a year later, they all gave better scores because they just didn't want to sit in the meetings.
Hmm.
And I think that that is a just such an example of how these things can go wrong
Yeah.
when we are checking the box for listening, but we're not really listening.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big part is listening and also not just listening once a year,
Hmm.
but making sure that we are in an environment where people are encouraged to give feedback.
Hmm.
Just like we were talking about with the field frontline workers, there are so many situations where we have cashiers, we have customer service reps, we have sales reps, we have all these people who are making an observation or they're noticing a trend or they're saying, this is happening and I don't know what to do with it. We don't give them channels to report that feedback that feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that is not happening, if you don't have that safety for
Mm-hmm.
feedback, then you're never going to have a situation where employees feel truly like they are part of something instead of just kind of clocking in and clocking out.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the number one thing is listening authentically and then also sharing what feedback we get from customers on a regular basis too.
Mm-hmm.
We have all this amazing technology now. We can do so much more real time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is shown to just have better results. So better coaching, all those things. People want that feedback if you give it to them within the right context.
Yeah.
So, if you're a store worker and at the end of the week, you hear something like, well, this one customer on Tuesday didn't give you a high mark because they said you were a little grumpy. You might go, what? I don't even know what that means. But
Mm-hmm.
if they walk out and you see that 5 minutes later and you go, you know what? I probably could have handled that differently, right?
Right.
I'm going to change my attitude now. So I think that is something we don't take advantage of enough is that
Mm-hmm.
real time because employees appreciate it. Customers get the benefit of that real time coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it's also just a more authentic way of being.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how it does bubble back up to not just the mission statement, because again,
Hmm.
and I think you said this, anyone can write a mission
Hmm.
statement. It's whether you actually believe it
Yep.
and are willing to uphold it. But when organizations do that and mean it, they have to be willing to uphold it. And this
Hmm.
is where I've had some really interesting conversations with leaders who have gone through some of this evolution. And when you are committed to it, what that then prompts is, to your point, that manager who is consistently getting poor
Hmm.
scores, that doesn't happen consistently
Right.
because it gets addressed, right?
Right.
And people that don't fit the mission, they don't really want to take part in that mission. They are removed. And
Hmm.
those are decisions that are hard, but if you're trying to create a new culture that is
Hmm.
aligned toward both the employee experience and the customer experience and whatever those, values are that you've identified, you have to be willing to stick to it. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. And like you said, you have people that start saying, whatever, I'll just give everyone a 10 because
Right.
no one cares anyway.
Right. Exactly. And we've
Yeah.
done that as customers, right?
Hmm.
Like we've been like, okay, whatever, you're not reading these anyway.
Right.
And I think the minute you lose that trust,
Hmm.
you're kind of doomed. And one of the things we talk about, because the whole idea of the mindset strategy discipline approach is that it's so easy to say, my favorite example is if you're a bank and somebody says, well, what do you do for customers? Well, we give them a safe place to put their money. Well, that is literally the definition of a bank, right?
Hmm.
So why should customers trust you? Like, you cannot be all things to all people. So who are you for? And getting really clear on, what, this is who we're for. This is what we'll do. This is who we are. Once you do that, we call it a tool. The mission statement is a tool. And one of the ways we encourage our organizations to use it is creating a dialogue around mission moments.
Hmm.
When did we live up to this mission? Let's use that as an example. And when did we not? Let's talk about that
Hmm.
and make it safe to talk about because things happen. We're not going to knock it out of the park every time.
Right.
So that's why trust is so important because if we have that trust built up, when we mess up with customers, they are more likely to stick with us if they've seen that trust built over
Hmm.
time. If we are always a little late, if we are just inconsistent, if it's maybe a little friction here and there, every single one of those things erodes trust. And so the more that we can commit to that mission and say, this is when we live up to it, and this is why couldn't we live up to it this time? Was it a
Hmm.
process? Was it something going on in the background? What do we do now? Do we apologize? Do we make retributions? What do we do? And if we don't make that a continuous conversation, then it's just a poster on the wall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you've mentioned surveys a couple
Mhm.
times, and I always see a lot of debate about NPS. Is NPS a good tool? Is
Mhm.
it worthless? And, there's arguments on both sides. When it comes to understanding customer sentiment, what are the best ways? I mean, I'm sure it's not just one thing, right? So
Right.
what are the things that people need to keep in mind?
Mhm. Well, one thing I like to say is there is no magic metric, right?
Hmm.
There's no one size fits all here. And humans are odd. We do not make sense. We are irrational creatures. So we will say one thing and behave totally differently.
Hmm.
And so it's very important to think about your feedback strategy and your voice of the customer program as multi-layered and multidimensional. Our
Hmm.
job is to look for the signals, to look for the indicators that something's not right or there's something to learn here that we can apply elsewhere. So the only way to do that, in my opinion, is to look at what are the feedback metrics that you do have. So surveys are fine. There's nothing wrong with surveys. The problem right now today with surveys is response rates are going way down.
Hmm.
And many surveys are just not written well, frankly. And so we're not getting the information that will lead to those insights.
Hmm.
So we have to make sure that we're asking the right questions and we're asking questions that we know we're going to do something about.
Hmm.
Curiosity is not enough. And I say that as somebody who named my company Experience Investigators. I
Hmm.
love, investigating, but we're wasting time if we're asking all these questions and we know we can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So that's the first step. NPS, Net Promoter Score, can be an incredibly efficient way to get that kind of sentiment. Would somebody recommend you or not? The challenge I see with NPS more often than not is the way it's used, not what it is. And so we have to make sure that we are asking the why or why not, and we're looking for that, and that it's done in a consistent, measurable way that makes sense to the customer.
Hmm.
I mean, in B2B, I've seen people say, yeah, we call everybody once a month. Well, they're not going to say that to you. They
Hmm.
have a relationship with you. So, really making sure that the feedback is collected well. Then looking at behavior. What are they actually doing? Are people rolling off at a certain point? Are they not renewing their contracts? What are their behaviors telling us? And then we have all this great, window with the analytics and technology and what are they doing online and what is their mobile usage telling us, all these different things. But we have
Hmm.
to really look at, first of all, what are we trying to find out
Hmm.
and building the feedback program around that, and then looking at the voice of the customer program for the insights that will matter and the
Hmm.
insights that make the most sense for us to address.
Yeah.
So it's so
Go,
much more complicated than a survey.
yeah. Going back to your point earlier about measurements versus outcomes, the issue one of the issues with the measurements, any of them, is they can all be pretty easily manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
So if you
Yep.
don't, going back again to intent, if
Yes.
you and authenticity, if you don't really believe in what you're doing and why, I mean, you can make the data say
Yep.
all sorts of different things that isn't in its true intent, or doesn't tell a
Mm-hmm.
full story, or doesn't give you specifics to follow up on. So yeah, that point
Absolutely.
is really important.
And I think as a customer, we've all had this happen where that story about the grill, I had all these
Mhm.
people mess up. But every time I got the call, they would say, tell me about the one person you just talked to, right?
Mhm.
I'd be like, well, they were fine. They were nice. I didn't want to throw them under the bus, but the whole
Right.
experience was
Yeah.
terrible. But there was nowhere where they asked about that because
Yeah.
everything was transactional. So if you're looking at things in a very siloed way, you're going to miss the actual journey that your customers have.
Right.
So, and then to your point about, you know, gaming the system too, we've all had that happen where we're leaving and they're like, well, if you can't give me a 10, let me know because,
Hmm.
which is so ridiculous but that's because it's become punitive instead of helpful to that
Hmm.
employee.
Yeah.
So it really is, it's become bastardized in so many different ways. And
Hmm.
the other thing I'd say is if you cannot correlate the feedback metric to real results for your organization, your leaders will stop listening.
Hmm.
And NPS is not easy to move in many industries. So if you're looking at it month after month and it's not moving, they start blaming the messenger on that,
Hmm.
even though you don't code the website, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
do these certain things, but it we have to make sure that we are approaching this from this perspective of here are the goals that we have. Here's what we're doing for them. This is why we're tracking what we're tracking, and this is what we're learning.
Yeah. The issue with that too, on the flip side, you're talking about if NPS is consistently on the low side or
Mhm.
negative side, people will stop paying attention. It's also a risk if it's consistently high, though, right?
Absolutely.
Because we know that customer expectations are continually evolving.
Hmm.
The needle is continually moving on what is a good or great experience to people. It's
Hmm.
a process of, continual improvement. So
Right.
there's also a risk of them saying like NPS has been good for this long. We don't need to pay attention to this anymore. And
Yeah.
then, everything kind of
Yeah.
crumbles. So, yeah.
We know our customers.
Hmm.
Yeah. One of the things I talk about, especially when we do customer journey mapping, um, I can't tell you how many leaders come up to me and they're like, you don't, our customers love us. They love us so much. And I always say, you're literally thinking about your best customer on their best day. We need to think about your worst customer on their worst day.
Hmm.
That's who we need to map for because that will give you so much more information that will help you help everyone.
Hmm.
But we love to tell ourselves these stories
Yeah.
of, well, and we do this in the organization too. Whenever I have a keynote or anything, I always have the one person who comes up and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're talking about this because I get it. It's just everybody else, right?"
Hmm.
Like, and we all assume we get it because we're customers or because we think we know what it is.
Hmm.
Um, I've heard expressions like, "Well, you know it when you see it."
Hmm.
And that's where we get into that really dangerous area of asking every single person to just define it on their own.
Hmm.
And that's the difference. That's the difference between the intentional, proactive organizations that do this well versus the ones that are just reacting and measuring for measuring's sake.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too. I feel like we have so many conversations on this podcast about things that conceptually are quite simple. So
Mhm.
it's pretty easy to get. I mean, you either think your customers' experiences matter or you don't, or you're focused on it or you're not. Of course, if it were that easy, everyone would be
Mhm.
doing it really well, right?
Yep.
It's conceptually, these things are very simple. To execute them in the context of
Mhm.
all of the dichotomies that we've talked about and all of the nuance that we've touched on, that's where it, is far, far harder. And
Yeah,
yeah. So,
for sure.
what are your thoughts on how AI is and will impact customer experience?
Well, it is for sure. And just like any other part of our life, in fact, I just wrote a newsletter about how now we have to think about how our customers will use AI
Hmm.
and what they'll find out and how to have savvier customers because of AI. But I think the main thing in service and experience is really about um, the people who are serving customers, either in contact centers or in the field or wherever. We have asked them to be encyclopedias, right? We have asked them to just walk around with a ton of knowledge in their head.
Hmm.
And then we get really upset when they can't find it within 30 seconds in 10 different binders or,
Hmm.
complex software programs. AI is changing the game on that very quickly and in a really good way, right?
Hmm.
We are able to ask in natural language, what do I do about this for a customer? And it can pull up the information just like that.
Hmm.
So that I think is very, very good. The flip side of that, of course, is that the basics, which could be handled directly by AI, and now we're seeing a lot more use of voice as well, and customers actually are more comfortable with voice AI. So we're handling all those basic questions and queries. And so only the big, tough, sticky stuff is going up to the humans.
Hmm.
And that's a different job.
Yeah.
That's a different job. And so we have to make sure that we are designing the workplace differently. We are designing the job roles differently. We are hiring differently. Because if we are only having, you know, tough questions, emotional customers, whatever it is, one after the other, that is emotionally taxing in a different way. And we have to
Hmm.
take care of our people differently. And the other part of that is if we're talking about technical expertise, then that's a totally different role than just
Hmm.
being someone who gets an escalated situation once or twice a day.
Yeah.
So that's the big part of the workplace that I think we have to tackle next.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really good point. I wrote an article, I think it was actually, might have been, no, it was last year, about an experience that I had with United Airlines, which I fly all the time.
Hmm.
But it was the good and the bad, right? Which the good is how sophisticated their mobile app has become, and how it's really incredible to have seen it progress to the point where,
Hmm.
if you are using it regularly, if there's a delay, before you could consider walking to a desk to talk to someone, it has given you
Yep.
everything you need to rebook, to get a hotel room, meal vouchers, all of it. You never have to talk to someone. But in this situation, there were a bunch of other factors, and I ended up having to, it was a rough situation. I needed to speak to human beings and sort some
Hmm.
things out, and they were absolutely incapable of helping me. And so that's the risk, right?
Yeah.
You've automated so much of
Yep.
the simple stuff in a really, you know,
Elegant way,
seamless
often.
way.
Yeah.
It's really impressive. But then when something goes wrong,
Yes.
there's all of these different factors. It's, do they have the skill set? Are they empowered? The silos, right? You're
Hmm.
approaching someone with this urgent, perhaps emotional problem, but it requires knowledge in a different area of the
Hmm.
business. There's all of these things that come into play. So I
Yeah.
agree. And I also think, we talk often on this podcast as well about the fact that, you know, I don't believe AI will replace human beings in service. So it's figuring out where is that human connection crucial and needed and desired in the customer experience, and how do we make sure it's there when it's needed and equipped,
Hmm.
et cetera. So I
Yeah.
agree. I think it's a really important thing to look at
Yeah. I think we are
now.
at the start of the marathon right
Hmm.
now. I mean, we are just seeing some of the impacts that it's already having on certain organizations.
Yeah.
And I feel like we are also seeing how quickly that technology can evolve.
Hmm.
And so if we can, feed it the good food that it needs to grow big and strong,
Hmm.
um, and make sure that we're keeping the junk food out of the diet, it can
Yeah.
do some pretty amazing things. The challenge I think we're going to have is that, a lot of organizations, their data is a mess.
Hmm.
They haven't quite, they're not set up for really producing the kind of results that we're seeing in some of these other organizations. So we need some savvy people at the top as well who can
Hmm.
put the right guardrails in place, who can make sure that employees are not only empowered but also educated enough to know when things might go off the rails,
Yeah.
right? Like, so there are all sorts of questions we are in the middle of answering right now as a society. And I vacillate between being really excited and amazed to, this might be a problem, right?
Hmm.
Like, and I think
Yeah.
that's how we're all kind of feeling about it. But it's really important to again come back to who are you all the time
Yeah.
and make sure that whatever you're doing with AI, it's aligning with that.
Yeah, I think also when it comes to talking about the customer experience and sort of the longer term impacts on competitive differentiation
Mhm.
and those sorts of things, just because AI can do it doesn't mean it should do it,
Right.
right? So I really appreciated a session this year at a conference where, someone shared in their customer service department how much they had automated using AI and what they ended up finding. And you would only find this if you truly cared and you were really looking not just for measurements, but for observations and for learning, is what she said is it it was very effective, and it was working well. That wasn't the issue. The issue is we started to, notice, however they were noticing, that customers just missed that human interaction. So we just kind of overdid it. And we
Mhm.
realized that if we wanted to differentiate ourselves, just because we could automate 100% doesn't mean we should. And so we've
That's
started to
right.
scale back a bit,
Hmm.
to use it differently, which I think is really smart.
I think it's smart, and it's going to be more needed moving forward. I mean,
Hmm.
we do have to figure out where are those places that matter the
Hmm.
most, and who do they matter to? Because not every customer is going to think it's a bad thing.
Right.
But there was that great story of a grocery store, I think in the Netherlands, that had all these automated checkouts. And they
Hmm.
realized that their older customers missed talking to the cashiers. So they created special checkout lanes so that they knew that those were conversation friendly.
Hmm.
And if you know about like all the longevity and stuff, like even that small interaction is healthy for people.
Yeah.
So that's the other question that we have to start answering as a society is like, how do we give people the way to opt into that? Because some of them, they absolutely need it. Not
Hmm.
because the AI can't solve their problem,
Right.
but just because they need that interaction. So I think there are big questions around this, and I hope to think that we're going to have an intersection where AI and humans will kind of do this together,
Hmm.
and that's what will hopefully bring us to that next chapter where it's just exciting and cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So other than sorting through some of those
Right,
important
the big
questions,
questions.
which we know organizations need to do, as we approach 2026, are
Hmm.
there any other, customer experience related trends that
Hmm.
you will be watching closely or
Hmm.
suggest others do as well?
Yeah, I mean, the big trend is around AI. There's just
Hmm.
no way around it. And I think some of the things that we talked about are really important to look at. But I think another trend is just customers, especially the customers in the younger generations coming up, they are curating their own experiences. And so when we talk about things like personalization,
Hmm.
I think we have to realize that part of that is giving them control and giving them options that they might not buy every product that we offer. And we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with like, they're going to curate this in their own way. So, how can we help them in their real lives, not just the journey that they're on with our brand?
Hmm.
And I think the more that we can focus on that, that's what people are really looking for.
Hmm.
And so I've been thinking a lot about kind of the difference between when we talk about personalization, we're still often talking about it as the brand, right? Like we're
Hmm.
going to personalize how you buy this sweater for you,
Right.
but we're not really thinking about what is it that they want with that sweater? Where does that fit in their wardrobe? Are there other things we can connect for
Hmm.
them? And I think that's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it brings us back to sort of a theme of a more holistic view, but like a theme of ecosystem. So, like, we
Yeah,
talk about this a lot in B2B as well, of ultimately customers are going to start looking at what are the overall outcomes they need,
hmm,
not just from one provider that
that's
provides a
right.
piece of the overall solution,
Hmm,
but who can help enable, the bigger picture in a
yeah,
more meaningful way. So it's interesting how that crosses
for sure,
both realms. Yeah.
for
Really good
sure.
stuff. Jeannie, thank you so much for coming on and
Thank
sharing all
you.
of this wonderful knowledge with us. So the book is coming out.
It is. It will be out in April 2026, but you can pre-order
Okay.
it now if you go on Amazon or anywhere, but you can also find it on our site at experienceinvestigators.com. There's a section called The Book. Go ahead and click on that, and all the options are there as well.
Wonderful. So everyone check that out and have a look at the book. Also, Jeannie is a great follow on LinkedIn, so go
Thank you.
ahead and do that as well. Thank you again, Jeannie. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Sarah.
You can find more by visiting the home of Unscripted at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.